So thank you so much for coming today to this talk about defending democracy. Today I'm going to tell you a little bit about a course that we are teaching here at Fort Hays. It's on World War II resistance. And we had a little over 14 students in person and about 20 or so online who are taking this class. And then we had 11 students travel with us to Germany and France as part of this class. And in the class, students are learning about all of the various ways in which folks defended democracy and worked against fascism under the Third Reich or its occupations throughout Central and Eastern Europe. They've read extensive primary and secondary scholarship on these processes and really debated the nature of agency and resistance at a time of war and oppression. And so I don't want to spend too much time talking about this class, but we did go to Germany and France. And this is really about the students today and not about those of us teaching the class. So I'm actually going to turn it over to my colleague and my co-teacher, my co-teacher of this course, Professor Holly Marquis, and she's going to facilitate some of these questions. And there will be time for Q&A after, so make sure that you jot down your questions. But let's work through this material before we open up for everyone else.
So we have 4 guests with us today. Cassie Jacobson is joining us online. We have Riley Kirshner, Kate Becker, and Owen Ravey. They're all history majors. Some of them are also secondary ed. And we've asked each of them to speak about different aspects of their experience. And I'm going to start with Kate. So Kate, we visited Plötzensee Prison in Berlin, and I remember you feeling very impacted by our visit. So I'd like to ask you to give a brief history of that prison, but also what stood out to you in your visit there.
Yeah, do you want me to stand up or just a minute?
Up to you.
What makes you most comfortable?
I'll just say it makes me most comfortable. The Plötzensee prison was built in between 1868 and 1878, and it was originally constructed on a large manor that was outside of Berlin, but today now it's surrounded by a bunch of industrial buildings, which is kind of an unsettling contrast between everyday life and the place that was marked by the immense suffering that happened there. You kind of, and like when you're walking into there, you pass through like tall, thick concrete walls topped with razor wire, and soon I found out that it's still a prison today, housing about 500, 600 prisoners there. And behind them, there's a huge, large brick building, part of the original prison complex, which remains active today. But deeper within the site, I wanted a quiet line path, find a bunch of plaques and memorials and signs. There's a smaller structure that's brick. It has curved windows and dark trim, and that was a location where around 3,000 people, or if you want to be exact, 2,891 people were executed under Nazi persecution. Around half of those were not even German. Among the victims were members of the Red Resistance group, and many prisoners held at Plötzensee were political dissidents, communist resistance fighters, and others deemed enemies of the Nazi state and their political agenda. They were often tried and was known as a Sondergericht. I don't know how to say it. It's a special political court, and also the People's Courts, which were established in 1934, which were trials that were just deeply unjust, frequently resulting in sentences of forced labor, imprisonment, and camps for execution. And again, they were very unfair. Now, what kind of stood out to me was not only was the tour guide. It was a very small building. There's 2 like main parts that you could go into. There's like kind of on the side, which was where we kind of talked to the guide. There was a room that was about 20 foot by 20 foot. It wasn't too big, and it had on the walls. There's like all the information of people who had passed away there and who were there. And again, that's important to recognize that it wasn't just Germans who were here. It was Austrians, people from even like Russians, people from like Slavs, people kind of in Roma cities from really anywhere. And the guide to me, I talked to her after, was very friendly, and she kind of talked to me about how, like, I asked her, I was like, hey, how do people react today, like, when they come to this prison? And she was telling me about how a lot of people don't take it seriously, that a lot of, like, especially like children, stuff like that, like, it's hard to get them engaged with the topic, and she was kind of worried about that. But then on the other side, up until 1942, the executions were carried out in a guillotine, or using a guillotine, and that's where, in the other part of the building, that's where it was. And then after 1942, the Nazis installed hooks on like a heavy wooden beam where they would hang the prisoners to execute them. And when I walked into this room, it was very overwhelming. the atmosphere was heavy and almost suffocating. It didn't help that it was also rainy and cold and kind of gloomy that entire day, which added to the weight of the experience. Inside the concrete floor, there was flowers and memorial placards, and there was marks where the guillotine once stood, and a water spigot remained in the corner, once used to wash away the blood, or perhaps to clean the hands and boots off of those who carried out the executions. And the floor itself appeared faintly stained. I'm not sure if this was from weathering of the concrete or with its red tint, if it was from the blood of, it was right around the area where the where there was a what is it called? A drain. And staying in that space, it was really deeply unsettling in the way that the tour guide kind of talked about it. She didn't go with us actually over to it, but we would come take pictures of it, and it was very solemn tone when we went over there. It was very harrowing too. I remember just feeling very wow, this is where a lot that happened, where thousands of lives were taking place. But yeah, and I don't know, it kind of just stuck out to me because of all the people who had died there, and they were also defenders of democracy, believing in what they were believing in, whether it was communism or socialism or just donated to reign of the Nazi agenda and fascism. They lost their lives because of it, and it. But yeah, I think it just is a reminder of the consequences of injustice and the importance of ensuring that stuff like that is never repeated, and it shows how important defending democracy truly is. Just can end up in
Something else that we learned there is once your loved one was executed there for resisting, they would then send you a bill for your loved one's execution. So they had copies of the bills, and each charge was itemized. The same day that we visited this prison, Riley, you went to Sachsenhausen. We had already visited Dachau, so I would like to ask you what you learned about how history is portrayed in those two camps very differently.
Yeah. So I really appreciate how Kate kind of talked about the feeling of going into these places, because when you walk into a concentration camp, the weather was never nice, and that was just something that I noticed. And whenever you walk in, you just hear the crows, and it's really heavy, and you don't know what to expect, and you walk in and you just feel overwhelmed by all of these feelings. You aren't looking at it with a critical eye while you're there. But once you leave, and once you go to another one, and so I went to Dachau and I went to Sachsenhausen on 2 different days. I went to Sachsenhausen while we were on our Berlin leg, and then Dachau while we were on our Munich leg. And at Dachau, most of the focus was on prisoner experience, and it was found in the museum, but instead of inside the structures themselves. And so this large structure, right when you enter the camp itself, has a walking museum that you walk through this building. And that's where you find all of the information about these prisoners and their time in Dachau, which you can walk the grounds, but you're not finding a lot of the actual information about what happened to them, what they experienced, their oppression inside of those actual spaces. And a lot of it was not a place that you could enter. Many of the buildings were taken down, and so there was really only 2 bare buildings and then a lot of churches. And I want to talk to you guys about the churches, because this is something that is differently portrayed in each place. And so in Dachau, there was these structures that were religious monuments. It was Christian, Jewish, Catholic, and it was all lining the back of the camp. If you stood at the front, you could see them right down this line of trees. There was churches, and those were not there when the prisoners were there. And this is important to note because they were built on a historical ground that was just holding so many memories for these people. And so going in there and building these structures kind of takes away from the fact that something else happened there. And while they were really effective and they were there to, for people to show up, and if they wanted to pray in their specific church, then they could, and they wanted to pray for that specific group of people that died there, they could. It wasn't necessarily like a memorial for those prisoners. It was very oddly placed, and I think that anybody who goes in there after leaving would think that. But that was kind of the focus of that camp when you walk in. And then the main portion that most people think of is the killing area. And Dachau wasn't a traditional killing center, but they had an area with crematoria and gas chambers. but these gas chambers were really sensationalized in a way that was really uncomfortable. And this is not to say that this was not well done. This is just to say that I looked at it with a very critical eye. And so you walk in, and they posed it as the prisoners were walking in and they were undressing, and they were getting ready to go to be in the gas chamber, and they were getting ready to die in the gas chamber. But that never happened at Dachau. And that's something that they made seem like it did happen. And the gas chambers were, I don't know how to explain it other than just eerie, because you walk in and you really do think that people died in there. But they did die. They did die a lot at Dachau, but it was in a different way. And so seeing them kind of form it and place it in that way was very different. But yeah, and a lot of the things in the killing area, there was a gallows that was right in the middle, but it wasn't standing. It was just a memorial for the gallows. It was saying that people were hung right outside of the crematoria, and that was another method of killing that was used there. And I think that that was more impactful than the gas chambers, after knowing that they were kind of lying about people dying in the gas chambers on that property. But moving into Sachsenhausen, this was an experience that I had separately, and it was far more impactful for me just because the exhibits were placed inside of the buildings, and it was more like walking in the place of where those prisoners were, and you got to see the more individual experience at that camp. At Dachau, it felt like they were kind of bringing in experiences from other camps, and it was more of a generalization of what was happening to these people. But at Sachsenhausen, the actual structures that were maintained and were standing were used as a memorial and were used as a site of placing that history where it was. So it was more focused on the prisoners and the SS. There was actually, we got to walk into an officer's house, and that was really impactful as well, because you got to see their view of the camp from their house. And so there was a window in the back, and I recall this very vividly. There's a window, and it has a circle, and you can stand exactly to see the gates of the camp from the back window of the officer's house. And so that's just something that I remember, that's placing history in a way where we can see exactly what they saw, and that's a really well done history. In the killing area in Sachsenhausen, it was reduced to rubble. There really wasn't much left in the crematoria area, but you could still walk in that area, and it was maintained as well as it could be. But everything that was at Sachsenhausen was maintained as it was, or they tried to anyway. But the exhibits were super impactful. You could walk where they walked, and once again, the weather was not good. It was still very uncomfortable, but leaving, you realize that this was a really nice way to look at things more critically. One more thing that I saw in Sachsenhausen that was just unique to the prison, or to that area, was the art. So they actually preserved prisoner art in the potato cellar, like potato peeling cellar, underneath one of the buildings where they had the main museum. And this was really impactful because they just put glass over it. And so they didn't alter it in any way. They just had it standing where it was. And these prisoners did art just to bring joy to their lives in such a horrible time. But those are the sorts of things that we saw there. I would just encourage people to go and see it for themselves, because it's really incredible.
Oh, and when I asked you what part stood out to you the most, it was Normandy Beach, where some of the largest resistance took place. So what was that like as a history major and future teacher to visit Normandy Beach?
It was amazing. It was my favorite part of the whole trip by far, and which all of it was perfect. But I've always been reading about Normandy and Utah Beach, Omaha Beach, all that forever, and so I was very excited to go there. And it was also pretty much my first time going to a beach, and it was just beautiful. And just unlike what they talked about, which their days were gloomy and it was sad, but this day going to all those beaches, it was the most perfect weather you can get. It wasn't windy, it was nice and cool, the ocean was beautiful. And so being able to take photos of all that and being able to remember it forever, to hopefully tell my students when I become a teacher, it's gonna be remarkable. And we also got to see the museum with a real B-26 and plane. And it was also one of the first times where I saw a Nazi flag that was in there off of a battleship. And seeing that in person was, I was not prepared. It was just an unreal experience. But I remember when I got to Omaha Beach, my dad is loves Normandy and D-Day and all that, just like me. So I had to FaceTime him, and I had to show him everything. And there's a cement wall on Omaha Beach where the American soldiers would hide behind because we were trying to go up the beach. But the main purpose was so our tanks couldn't crawl up it. And I didn't know this before until our tour guide, but there's, if the beach is going this way, on the end there's a sniper's nest, but it was with a machine gun that could aim all the way down the beach. And so, I mean, it's unreal how we were able to take the beach at all. I mean, everything was set up against us. They were all just seasick. And we got to go to the cemetery afterwards, actually, where there was over 9,000 American lives lost. And seeing that afterwards, but also like when you because the first beach we went to is Utah, and you just go through this little alleyway up into the beach, and like, yes, it was very sad, like knowing what happened and how many lives were lost, but it almost made me feel personally like proud as like an American to see and just all the effort that we all put in to defeat the Germans at that time. It was an unreal experience to be a part of it. It'll be great to save those photos and be able to show my class in the future.
We have some sneaky photos of you FaceTiming your family too, so we can include those.
Those are some of my favorites from the whole trip, by the way.
So Cassie, you are somebody who's an online student, but you're also currently a teacher. So I'd like you to talk about this experience coming in as an online student, but also what this experience means for you to share with your students.
Oh.
We
There
can
we go.
Okay, okay, I'm going to actually touch base and come off of everybody's. I'm kind of glad I got to go last on this one because in all actuality, this was, I would agree with Owen, it's surreal, transformative. As an online student, I am secluded. I'm actually in the classroom that I teach in. I teach 5th, 6th, and 7th graders history, and I love it. But my experience in this class and be able to go and attend study abroad, I not only get to create some relationships that I feel like are already becoming lifelong with fellow students, but I took so many pictures and images, but I think the most transformative part was standing in the spaces of history. Just like Kate and Riley both said, they connected emotionally. There was not one day that I didn't have a tear streaming down my face in some way, shape, or form, which is the main reason I wanted to attend this, because I want to bring it to life in my classroom. I'm working currently right now on a massive World War II lesson plan to bring it alive, and I'm utilizing this idea of defending democracy, which again was the main reason for wanting to go. As an online student, I tend to just bury myself in the assignments and figure out always though how I can apply it to my classroom. But to actually walk in history I still can't believe I was in the spaces I was in. Still to this day, I look back at pictures, I'm like, no way I wasn't actually there. So while there was a lot of emotions, it helps me present that choices have consequences even stronger, especially when teaching resistance movements and the various kinds of resistant movements, but it also helps me connect with that social emotional development for students too. It's very difficult to talk about the Holocaust and some of the memorial places that we were at, but I think it's important to also convey it in a age-appropriate way, but it teaches empathy, and it teaches to, it's going to allow me to teach some aspects that my textbook doesn't allow me to teach. There's one lesson, that's it, of World War II. No mention of resistance. There's a paragraph about the Holocaust. And I am big about going beyond the textbook, and that's what this is going to allow me to do, is take these spaces that we were in and connect them within my classroom. And like I said, I've already been working very diligently on lesson plans. Some of the information that we've gained from this class and implementing my images and even the tours we were on. Original images versus what it looks like today. And those today pictures are mine. That's my experience that I get to share with them.
And we're going to skip over the next question.
I don't know if I have anything else.
Beautiful, thank you, Cassie. So we're going to skip over the next question. We're going to skip over the next question just to make sure that we can get to the other stuff and have room for Q&A. But one of the main things that we used to kind of tie this together is we talked about how learning about World War II resistance in the past can help us understand how to defend democracy today. And so I thought it might be interesting if you all shared a little bit about what you've learned in the class and on the trip, and how that can help you think about what young people can do to defend democracy today.
First, is that okay? Okay. So I learned mostly, so a lot of people may focus on armed resistance for their form of like defending democracy because that's direct defense, right? I'm thinking more so education, educating the youth and breaking down misinformation. And that's something that we saw both on this trip and in the classroom daily. This is something that we read about all the time. And specifically on the trip, when I'm talking about breaking down the spread of misinformation, maybe talking about the White Rose and their spread of leaflets. So they wrote leaflets that talked about the government, and they broke down policies that were not doing justice to the citizens and things like that. Defend democracy. The youth are the future of democracy, and education is should be the number one priority.
Yeah. For me, I think that something that's really significant about it is that a lot of these people were ordinary people who rose up to the occasion, and that it also shows how it wasn't just in history likes to leave out a lot of certain individuals and groups of people, and it wasn't just men who were doing it, it wasn't just women who were doing it, it wasn't just people who were LGBTQ community who were doing it, it was everybody. There's a lot of it takes a lot of education, a lot of work, and a lot of bravery to overcome democracy. When in our class we learn about the leaflets and the White Rose members who were medical students in school in Munich, and we saw where they dropped the leaflets and got arrested. That was really powerful, especially with the tour guide, or the lady who just showed it. She was really, really friendly. And then just hearing about all the stories of how people had overcame, especially throughout the books that we read, the partisans, BSD Austria, which was a large partisan group that was largely accepting of Jewish individuals, which you don't really hear about. Most partisan groups that were they're either anti-Semitic, or they didn't allow children or women or people who were older because they were seen as burdens. And so seeing a large group and create a large community and be successful in saving Jewish lives, and seeing how I think it was really important to see how people, rather than attacking the Nazis, they're more focused on saving Jewish lives and saving Jewish culture. That's really important when you're talking about genocide, especially a fascist government who is focused on the genocide of large groups of people. Is maintaining culture, staying alive, surviving, educating children about what happened, and I think another thing is just they had leaflets. They were giving out leaflets. There was literature. They were saving books. They had libraries underground. They had women were going around and helping soldiers escape. They were They're giving spy information. When we went to D-Day, the farmer had a blind son who gave coordinates of coastal artillery guns the Germans had that helped the Allies. It's really an all-inclusive effort, and I think that's a really important part.
When I was thinking about this question, the first thing that came to mind was that age does not matter at all. I mean, one of the youngest people we learned about was a 5-year-old, where they hid messages on him during that time, and he would give the messages to other resistance groups. And so, I couldn't even fathom being a 5-year-old doing that. And then, there's older people too. And so that was the last thing about the whole time, is just I couldn't get past that. Age did not matter whatsoever. There was every age group helping the effort at that time. And so I just think that's something that it needs to happen now still. It's just that it doesn't matter how old you are, that you're helpful no matter what in any situation.
So I would have to say I agree. Age, status, gender, none of it mattered. I think one of the biggest things, you touched base, Riley, on my white rose tour that I gave, and I obviously embraced that white rose more than most people probably expected. But I think, youth, sharing with youth what youth are capable of and have been capable of is, I think, key. Especially when it comes to education, but showing them democracy stops when we're silent and we remain silent, teaching them how to speak up. And that's one of the things, every aspect of this class, through our readings, heck, the Courier Girls we just did this week, every aspect teaches speak up, be active, whether it's from the smallest little bit of carrying a message to active armed resistance. There's all aspects, and we're learning about all of it in this class, and it teaches the idea of speaking and teaching our young children of today not to be silent, but also digging through misinformation too. And that's something that we have definitely learned in this class.
And so the final question is, what can learning about World War II resistance teach us about defending democracy today? That's an easy question.
Yeah. Learning about World War II resistance can teach us so much about defending democracy, and what we've already talked about, all of our experiences there and what we learn in the classroom, is just to continue what had been done in a different way. So learning about World War II resistance, they're defending their democracy, and so educating ourselves about what's happening in maybe our current climate is the best way to defend our democracy, and that can teach us. They taught us exactly, they gave us the blueprint to do exactly what we need to do.
She's kind of nailed on the head, like the blueprint. I think, we can, through what we have learned in the past and what we experienced over there, how different groups came together to resist Nazi oppression, we can also hold it to ourselves to be equally as educated today with the current political climate, to know how we can react, how we can resist, how we can do things to ensure that democracy stands still and strong and people don't end up oppressed. I think something that the biggest part that I took away with that, like I said earlier, that anybody can really be a part of it. It's just, and there's a lot of risk involved with sometimes with resisting, but that's what makes it important.
As Kate said earlier, when we learned about how they buried books, artwork, and their experiences in the ground, I think at that time they were defending their democracy, but they were also planning for future generations and defending their democracy as well by making sure people didn't forget about those experiences and times and artifacts and all that. And so I think that's a big deal. It's just, of course, defending your own democracy, but always thinking about the future generations ahead and defending that as well.
Yeah, I would agree with that statement as well. Let's be honest, resistance looks similar but different in many ways even today, but I think it's our responsibility to be informed, recognize the voices of the past in order to, provide action or information even today. And of course, my favorite part is just digging through all of the information and being able to highlight the history of it in resistance. It shows that ordinary people are capable of extraordinary things, and hiding, surviving, living another day to tell the story is also a form of resistance. Anybody can be a resistor. Just speaking up is half battle. And you can be afraid and you can have fear, but it's really pushing through.
All right, so we did have a tremendous catering hiccup in this room, and if we want to give like maybe 5 minutes, grab your food very rapidly, collect your questions, make sure you save some food for these amazing students so that they can eat when we're done, and then we will start doing an open Q&A. Feel free to stay in line. Yeah. And these students are used to rolling with very chaotic professors, so you won't all disarm them by being noisy back there. So does anyone have any questions?
Anna's classroom has a question. So one of our students who's currently teaching is showing this in her classroom. She said, where should young people start if they're interested in defending democracy? And if you could tell high school students anything about this course or this trip or the Holocaust, what would it be? So maybe not all of you answered both questions. So one of you take one and one of you take the other. So where should young people start if they're interested in defending democracy?
I think they should start by learning and educating themselves, becoming well versed in like democracy, politics, governance, and the current political climate. So that way they are able and to understand things and contribute in a way that's educated. Yeah, that's the best way, just educated.
And listening, like read your current issues. Like that's the first way to start is, I mean, I know your current issues teacher, I don't know what class you're in right now. But what I do know is that I started by just reading the news. And a lot of people don't want to, but you have to. It is the way that you understand what's going on in your world and the way that you defend yourself in your democracy.
And if you could tell high school students in Anna's classroom anything about this course or this trip, what would it be?
If you got the chance, take it, do it. It was one of the best experiences I've had so far at FHSU. I mean, this class, I've learned the most by far. It's because I feel like this class especially is not something that you learn in high school specifically. Because usually you just learn the general knowledge in wars. You don't learn the personal side of it. And so, I mean, I've learned stuff that I would have never even thought about in this class. So definitely, if you have the chance, take it.
I would agree with that statement very much so, Owen. Take it. I think if there's anything that I can take away from this class and tell a high schooler today, would be there's a lot more history out there than our textbooks ever tell us. Go beyond and go hunt it out. This class does that with you, and it encourages you to ask more questions, and you get to experience history itself in person overseas. So I encourage this class very much so. It was an amazing experience.
And one of the cool things is Deanna is actually one of the students that was on our trip. So she's also a virtual student, and she also teaches high school in her classes. So that's very neat. Other questions?
Okay, I have a question, because I even find this difficult, finding credible news sources. Everybody wants to be a pundit, everybody's got a podcast. So, where do you go?
Do you want me to, do you guys want to take this or you want me to do it?
I can tell you what I do,
Okay.
if that's helpful to you. Because a credible news source for me is something that's really hard to find, but reading multiple news sources, no matter what you see or how you feel about their view or their politics, you compare them and you understand the facts of the situation. And you understand what's really going on. So if you see Fox and you see CNN and then there's one in the middle, compare all three. Read all three. Read as much as you can. Like, it's a credible news source. If I think I understand that you're asking how to find credible news sources, and that's a really hard battle to find.
It is nowadays.
But if you read multiple and you read in-depthly and you try to understand what's going on in that situation, you'll get what you need out of multiple articles.
I would also encourage people to develop the skills of a historian, not to make a mindless plug for history. But the fact is, what we do for a living is we read multiple perspectives from a different place and time. And nothing is more foreign than the past. So if you can consume various different points of view and think through them and critique them all equally, you will be able to critique anything you pick up. And so that's the really good thing that our historical students have, is they can read material and critique it. Information literacy is what they peddle in. And they understand how people think and feel. Oh, sorry, go Cassie.
Go Cat. I was also going to touch base on that, the perspective aspect, but the other part is talk to the local people. Everybody's on social media in some platform. I lived from big major cities to overseas to the teeny tiny town I live in now of all 100 people. And I think when you connect with the local people that might be experiencing that, besides all the other news sources, it's going to help you make more of an informed choice. The more research, as Dr. Nickel was saying, the safer you are making informed choices.
I will tell you that just recently, because I know there are very opposite points of view nowadays, and it's really hard to have a discussion. I've even made the comment in my swim class that a couple of us or more little want to say something, we go swim to a corner of the pool because we're afraid somebody might hold our head underwater.
What
But
kind of swim class are you in?
no, but it can get very hostile. And I managed to have a conversation with my nephew, and I knew he was on an opposing side, but I want to understand that side as well, to understand where they're coming from. I think we need to be respectful. I will tell you, when I opened up my sweater, it had a T-shirt about Ukraine and democracy. His jaw nearly dropped on the floor. But we managed to keep it simple and hug each other afterwards. And I think we need to be able to listen to people that we might not agree with.
Other questions?
Well, just any thoughts, because, in one sense, contrast to World War II might not be the most apt. Something to consider. In that you had military intervention, hostile act, armed resistance, perhaps, all these sorts of things. But there might be one threat that continues. I want you to consider Orban's Hungary and his path, his model of illiberal democracy. That's one thread in common. That Hitler was elected. They both used democratic means. He did win an election.
But it's not to be what he was.
No, not to be what he was. But he started with the democratic process, subverted it rather radically. And that's the difference. Because I'd say maybe it's harder to resist illiberal democracy. Maybe that's why that model was successful for as long as it was. Because democracy can die by degrees, little bits where consolidation of media into fewer numbers of people who are then bound to loyalty to the government for financial reasons, buying off oligarchs, giving contracts, all of these means, and consolidating power in the executive branch of government. All seem to be moves that could be within the democratic framework, slightly altered to gain you by degrees, something that ends up being no fascist. How do you resist that? And is it radically different than how you resist, if you're a French resistance fighter?
It's a great question that unfortunately I do not have the answer to. So, do you guys have any thoughts?
I think it's a great question to learn about and research for sure. That's just something I don't have enough research yet to answer correctly, and I don't want to answer it wrongly, so that's something I have to research.
I mean, I think though people did begin to resist Nazis in the early stages of it. I think that a difference of it is that Nazis were different. They didn't do it by degrees; they did it by killing people. That's how they killed their political opponents. They got rid of people who were in power, who could threaten their power. And so I think that they didn't do it by degrees, but by lives taken. And I think that it's really hard to recognize it, but that's what's important about being educated and and speaking out when things are going wrong. And that's, I think, all we can really necessarily do unless shit hits the fan. So.
I'm trying to spotlight the students, but I will say it's important to understand that people did resist at every stage, and that the biggest resistors to fascism and to the rise of the Nazi Party were communists. And actually, in the day that the Enabling Act was voted on, they were all rounded up and imprisoned so that they could not resist because they had already been resisting. But they resisted different groups very systematically within Nazi Germany, as well as occupied territories and from outside, so this is not about just from within. They they did this throughout the entire course of the war, but it became harder to resist the longer it went on because of the extreme violence that Kate talked about. So because they had terrorized the population into being afraid to speak, that's going to happen towards 44 and 45. But before, resistance is commonplace. It's not an abnormal thing. And it can be done both within a liberal and liberal democracies. It's just within a more liberal democracy, you have mechanisms like the vote and checks and balances and those kinds of things. But I don't think anyone wanted to compare this to a contemporary situation, but rather just make general statements on how to protect one's democratic systems, be it in Hungary or the United States.
Brian, I saw your hand up.
Yeah, well, so that was a good example, that's right. But part of it is being honest with themselves. This is cliche, but to tell the truth is uncomfortable, right? And being honest with themselves is also knowing what we are not capable of, and then trying to step beyond that comfort zone. And to the point about being committed to small behaviors, that's a constant ongoing process. You're right. It's not just a hat you put on and it's comfortable with going out to vote. In a general election, it's showing up off-season elections, local elections, and more than that, it's about having uncomfortable conversations. That's swimming with regiment. And talking to your friends, and even those you may not be comfortable with, and just being as honest as you can, and presenting as, I would say unbiased, because we all have our biases, right? But the idea of, I'm kind of all over the place here, but the idea of like, hey, just read as much as you can, absolutely. But interrogate it hard and understand that trying to meet in the middle when you have one source that is objectively untrue and another that's largely predicated in a reality-based world, and trying to mesh them will still give you the wrong answer and still present a lie. And we also have to remember that a lot of sources actively deal in bad faith. They know what they're presenting to you is dishonest. They know what they're presenting to the audience is untrue, but because these topics are so complex and so vast, they can say they, I don't like using that kind of pronoun, but these actors will implicitly sprinkle in things that are factually true in building up that scaffold of untruthfulness, right? So we have to be critical users, I hate that too, consumers, hate that too, of information all the time.
I have a question for the panel here. So how do you have conversations with your peers, your friends? Like when I was younger and we were closer to World War II, right? Because, time separates things, and this could never happen again, right? But now maybe we see some things that where it could happen again. So how do you have conversations with your friends to kind of help them understand and help them to not be so apathetic?
This was actually something that I've experienced recently. A lot of people, specifically people close to me, have a different idea of what it meant to be in this situation and what it meant in the grand scheme of things, like for the Holocaust to happen, for what happened in World War II, all of the atrocity, and how this was not or has not been the only genocide, and it will not be. And I think that that's important that they understand that. And yes, it was bad, and yes, it's the one that most people know about. But this is not something that only happened in one place. This is not the only Holocaust. And this is something that I tell my family. This is something that I have told my friends, even my fiance. We've talked about this a lot. And this has been something that you simply just have to be honest. You have to present the facts, and you have to say, this is something that has happened, can happen, and potentially will happen again. And we have to be prepared, and this is only about defending your democracy. And what will you do? Or how will you act if this were to happen, or will happen to you, which you cannot know. So I don't expect anybody to be able to get to it.
That's one thing too, is just when you're talking about stuff like that, I think some of the best things, which all the professors have done a great job, is just, especially in with younger minds, keeping your opinion out of it and just stating the facts so you can let people build their own kind of opinions later on. And I think that's the important thing, is just stating the facts of what happened and then just kind of letting the people branch off and form from there. So I think that's an important piece.
You're on mute.
I'm going to jump in real quick. First off, I wanted to touch on the Gibbs writing that we read, Dr. Valenka, and how the different stories of whether women were at the camp, not at the camp, and how oral histories have changed over time. I feel like we face that on a regular basis. And through research and intuitiveness and just putting, head to the grindstone on his research, he discovered so much more beyond what was there in the physical and the oral histories and diving more. And I think that's, again, how I communicate as the Owen touch base, giving the facts. And then from there, resources of where you got your information. I know I have a very wide variety in my family of beliefs and extended family, so on and so forth, but one of our favorite things is to come down as generations between my children and my parents, and we have conversations, and when somebody goes, well, where did you get that information from? And we give them where we got it. We'll even send them a link to give more information based upon the information we discovered. To me, it's the hardest aspect because I have friends of all different ages, and just trying to express the factual information is the first step, but never stop researching. And I guess that's what ended up driving me into the history program to begin with.
So that is like the perfect segue for us. You mentioned a reading by Dr. Chad Gibbs. He is coming to campus from South Carolina to talk to us about his new book, which is about how he placed women in the Treblinka Revolt. Despite the fact that most of the oral histories didn't mention women at all, his research places women in that history, and he will be here on campus April 30th at 5 p.m. in Tebow Library. We're really excited to get to host him in that beautiful space. One of our other panelists mentioned that we read Defiance by Necromus Heck, and we're going to be showing the film that's based on that book on April 19th at 3 p.m., April 21st at 3:30 p.m. in Tebow Library, and Riley's going to be hosting our discussion after. So I hope that you can join us for those last two events, and I thank you for showing up signing.
And then our panelists are going to grab food and eat real quick. So if you want to come chat with them a little, at least give them a chance to take a bite in between while they do this. I don't know how long we have this space for. Do you know?
I think I booked till a quarter after.
Yeah. Okay, yeah.
A quarter after, so you have time.
Chat with them.
Yes.